Hail and welcome. Paul here once again. Now, in my last lecture, we talked about the 7th century and the dominance of the northernmost Anglo-Saxon kingdom, Northumbria. I also talked about how that kingdom was constantly at war with the kingdom of the Midlands, Mercia, for dominance of Saxon Britain. Now, after the death of Penda, the last pagan king of Mercia, and the last pagan king of the Anglo-Saxons for that matter, and his son ruling as a Christian, it was like the one thing holding Mercia back from being the dominant kingdom now wasn't an issue anymore. I also mentioned in my last lecture one of the main reasons that Mercia superseded Northumbria: location. Mercia was at the heart of Britain. Northumbria was at the top. All of the kings after Penda, throughout the remaining years of the 7th century going into the 8th, are what helped bring forth that dominance. And that dominance came to a peak in the 750s under a very powerful king who paralleled the reign of Charlemagne and is often compared to him as well, King Offa. Offa came to the throne after a civil war against his cousin, King Ethelbald, where he was slain. Now, Ethelbald would have paved the way for Offa and brought Mercia to a power that Offa would inherit after he became overlord of Kent and Wessex. The Kentish and the West Saxons would attempt to take their power back after Ethelbald's death, but Offa would challenge that power. Ethelbald was also responsible for London becoming part of Mercia, while before it was part of the kingdom of the East Saxons, Essex. Now, despite Offa's power and importance, there isn't nearly as much information about him out there as you'd think. He has no surviving contemporary biography, and most of the information we have about this period was from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, making that documentation extremely biased in favor of the Kingdom of Wessex. But we do know some things about him. One of the main things we know about him is that he was the dominant king of the Anglo-Saxons during the time that Charlemagne was the dominant king on the continent, ruling over France and large parts of Germany and Italy and everything in between. The two monarchs are often compared to each other, and supposedly they came to a sort of diplomatic agreement that they were both equals. We see this in a letter that Charlemagne had sent to Offa in 796. This was at the end of Offa's reign though, so let's go back to the beginning. As I said before, Offa's predecessor, King Ethelbald, was responsible for putting London under Mercian control, while before it was East Saxon. Now, the royal house of Essex was still a thing throughout the 8th century, so it is also very likely that they retained their native rulers under a strong Mercian influence. London was important, mostly because of trade. You had a lot of trade coming in from the continent through the Thames estuary. The Mercian conquest of London put Mercia in control of that trade. The next most important part of England for continental trade was Kent, which Offa was also able to put into his grip, though not without resistance. It is said that Offa exploited the instability of power in Kent, as the kingdom was traditionally ruled by two separate kings. In 764, Offa seemed to have made himself overlord of Kent, and even challenged the power of the Archbishop of Canterbury by creating his own archbishopric in the heart of Mercia, in Lichfield, having permission from the Pope himself to do so. His influence may have also been extended into Sussex, the kingdom of the South Saxons, but that information and evidence is sketchy at best. Offa also had made attempts to exert control over the more major kingdoms. In 794, he is said to have had ordered the King of East Anglia, Ethelbert, to be beheaded. Now, this could have been due to Offa trying to make coins with him on them in East Anglia, making Ethelbert rebel against him. In Wessex, King Cynewulf recovered much of the frontier territory that Offa's predecessor Ethelbald had conquered. However, in 779, Offa went to war with Cynewulf and won most of that territory back. Offa also had married his daughter Ealfled to the king of Northumbria, Ethelred I, in the year 792, but there is no evidence of any sort of overlordship over the Northumbrians. If there's one thing that King Offa is famous for, it is Offa's Dyke, a giant border ditch he had ordered constructed on the frontier of Mercia and the Welsh kingdoms. Now, going back to my previous lectures, we talked a lot about the conflict between the Anglo-Saxons and the Britons, which is rooted in the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons in Britain, pushing the Britons into the west into what would become Wales and Cornwall. Throughout the following centuries, the Britons would frequently make retaliatory raids into Saxon territory, stealing livestock and treasure, and Mercia was the kingdom who got it worst, because the whole western portion of that kingdom is on the border of all of Wales. Now, there is some dispute over whether the dike's construction was done completely in spite of the Welsh, or if there was some sort of mutual agreement between the Welsh king of Powys, as Offa would often lead his own campaigns against the Britons. Regardless, the dike was when we began to see a definitive border between England and Wales. Even today, the Welsh refer to crossing into England as crossing the dike. Offa's Dyke was far more than just a frontier marker. It was also a symbol of the power and might of Mercia. In the following century, Alfred the Great's biographer, a Welsh cleric named Asser, wrote of the Dyke. There was in Mercia in fairly recent times a certain vigorous king called Offa, who terrified all the neighboring kings and provinces around him, and who had a great dike built between Wales and Mercia from sea to sea. Now, although the dike was built for defensive purposes against the Welsh, it also helped the Welsh create their national identity. It gave the Welsh kingdoms a greater sense of this part of the land is ours and ours only. Offa died in 796, being succeeded by his son Egfrith, who apparently only ruled for 141 days, and then being succeeded by a distant relative named Kenwulf, presumably because Offa had arranged for the murder of any nearer relatives in order to eliminate dynastic rivals. Throughout the course of the 9th century, Mercia's power began to wane, and the kingdom of Wessex began to rise. This mostly had to do with their prowess over a new type of invader from across the sea. But that is a story for next time. Wastu Hall.